Okay, so let's go ahead and get out your blue books, Jesus and the Holy Spirit. Oh, and actually, before we do that, you guys give me your logs of how many minutes you were able to spend with Jesus this week. But let's go ahead and turn to chapter 1 in your blue books. Jesus and the Holy Spirit is the title of this book. And it's really important because we worship Jesus as God, and the Holy Spirit is with us. He's the helper that Jesus sent us after he ascended to heaven with the Father. So it's very important to have a good, not only cultural understanding of Christ, and that's especially what this chapter 1 is going over, but a biblical and truthful understanding of Christ, because it can really radically affect the way that you live out your faith. This first paragraph on chapter 1 says, Jesus Christ is the only major religious leader who ever claimed to be God. None of these, Moses, Buddha, Muhammad, or Confucius, ever made such a claim. Christ is the only individual whom a great portion of the world worships as God. Jesus is unique, not only because of his claim to deity, but because of his eternal existence, his fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy, and his sinless life on earth. And we'll dive into, you guys already dove into those three different things: eternal existence, prophecy, and sinless life. But we're going to take a look at some of those. Okay, so first off, who can read Exodus 3:13 and 14 for us? Actually, let's not read that. Let me just hear what you got for the answer. I am who I am, right? That's what God said that his name was, right? Okay. And then here on John 8:56 to 59, what did Jesus claim, especially in verse 58 there? Yeah, it says, truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. Which we know grammatically that doesn't make sense, right? For me to say, yesterday I am. Okay? So Jesus was making a statement here. And how did the teachers respond in verse 59? They wanted to light him up, right? So they knew exactly what he was claiming. And what was he claiming? He was attributing the same name to himself as the name that the Lord attributed to himself back in Exodus to Moses. So the same God who drew Moses near to the burning bush, the same God who sent all the plagues upon Egypt and delivered the people from the land of Egypt, is standing before them and saying, I am. Do you recognize me? And we'll get into that a little bit more with John 14. Okay, I am curious to know what were the implications of the name I am that you guys have kind of thought about. I think the name I am, when God first reveals it to Moses there with the burning bush, it implies a transcendence over the time that we have in our world, right? It shows that he's not bound by, he's not confined to the kind of timelines that we have, because he can say something like, yesterday, I am. Tomorrow, I am. 5 minutes ago, I am. The grammar doesn't make sense because he's above the grammar, and the timeline doesn't make sense because he's above that. Also, it implies that he depends on nothing and no one else for his existence, right? He is supremely independent. So it wasn't, then this happened and I became, or I came into existence. I just am. Nothing caused me to be. I just am. In John 10:33, why do you think the Jews reacted so violently? Taking a look at John chapter 15, why did the Jews react so violently? And why do non-believers in general react so violently to a claim that Jesus is? Okay, so you saw here on page 8 some of the fulfilled prophecies, and there are tons of fulfilled prophecies, over 300 that were fulfilled by the man Jesus of Nazareth, which rules out coincidence, right? That's what this little blurb here on page 9 showed us. But what does the fulfillment, Christ's fulfillment of prophecy mean to you guys? I think, kind of going back to what Aaron said, that it shows how God had a plan from the beginning of creation, even from the very time that he kicked out Adam and Eve from the garden. They kicked themselves out. And he said, he prophesied about Christ, talking about how he would crush the heel, or he would crush the head of Satan. And have you guys taken literature classes or English classes where you had to kind of derive what was the theme or the thesis of this writer? What was the theme of this novel? Yeah. You can kind of see how if history is a novel and God has the authority to write history like a novel, he has the power to write history like a novel, he is putting all these literary and rhetorical structures into history, just like foreshadowing, things like archetypes, things like analogies, right? To paint the picture of Jesus Christ, including the foreshadowing and prophecy from the Old Testament. So God is actually preaching the gospel throughout history, the way that he writes it, because everything is written to bring about the fulfillment, which is Jesus Christ and his sacrifice and his victory, ultimately, at the end of time. So, what it said for me is that Jesus really does transcend time. And it makes a pretty compelling argument for his lordship. Okay, let's just run through these really quick on page 10. What did Pilate say about Jesus?
He couldn't find any wrong in him.
No wrong in him, no guilt in him. Paul.
He was sin on our behalf.
Sorry?
He was sin on our behalf.
Yeah, he was sin, but he also said he had no sin, right? God made him who had no sin to be sin for us. Peter. Committed no sin or deceit. And what challenge, even, I love this in John chapter 8, what challenge did Jesus make to his enemies?
To try and convict him of sin.
Try me, right? He knew that was the winning argument in any time that he wanted. He could have pulled that out, right? That was the trump card. Convict me of sin. Go ahead. Oh, dang it, we can't. They just walk away, right? They can't do it. And so Jesus boldly proclaimed that he was sinless in this challenge. Hebrews 4:15 says, not word for word, but what did you guys get here?
He was tempted in every way, didn't sin.
He was tempted in every way, yet was without sin. So you see how many scriptures assert the sinlessness of Christ. He was tempted with hunger, with curiosity, with entitlement. Right there in verses... what did you guys get for verses 5 and 6 on Matthew 4, 1 through 11? What did Satan try to tempt Jesus with? Would you guys have a hard time with that? What did you say, Blake?
Authority, basically.
What did you say?
Authority.
Authority. Yeah, authority. I kind of saw it as like what Dr. Smith was saying at Paradigm a couple weeks ago. Yeah, he was tempting him to entitlement. You have the right to jump off this temple and to charge the angels to bear you up on their wings so that you strike not your foot on a stone. And he's tempting him with that. But Jesus knew that it would be disobedient to God his Father if he enacted his right. Okay. Over on page 12, I just want to run through what these passages, and I'll tell you something, this authority feature is really, really important as you share the gospel. Being able to tell people confidently what Jesus has authority over brings credibility to the message of the gospel. Especially, I've seen it overseas. When you can go to someone in a cross-cultural setting, someone who hasn't been to Falls Creek 30 times, and tell them, let me tell you about this Jesus, and they have no idea who he is. And you can tell them he has authority over this, he has authority over that, and use these stories to show them, look, there's literally no area where he hasn't got authority. So, Matthew 8:27, what authority did Jesus have?
Authority over the wind and the waves.
Yeah, over the wind and the waves. You could say he had an authority over nature, right? The powers of nature. And he demonstrated that a couple times. How about Mark 1:21-27?
Spirits.
Authority over spiritual forces and the cosmic powers in this present darkness, right? Anybody read This Present Darkness by Frank Peretti?
I've read some of
I read
it.
about 3/4 of it.
Yeah. Then I threw it away. It's a dark one,
It is. This present
but it's
darkness. Mark, how about Mark 1:40-42?
Over diseases.
Yeah, authority over diseases. Or you could say he has the authority over health, the state of anyone's health. John 10, it'll be interesting. There's a differentiation between these last two, but what did Jesus have authority over in John 10:17 and 18? Somebody say something?
His own life.
His own life. Yeah, he had authority over his own life and his own death. Right? He can lay it down and he can take it back up. And then John 11:43-45, what did he have authority over?
other people's lives.
Other people's lives. Everyone's lives, right? Our own lives. Okay, that's really important. So I hope you guys will remember that. As you read stories about Jesus in the gospel, look for the authority that he has, because that's huge. Again, Matthew 7, what amazed the people about Jesus? 28 and 29.
He taught with authority.
He taught with authority, more so than
Scribes.
even the seasoned scribes. This was their life, their vocation. They were trained even. Jesus was just a carpenter. Mark 2, what authority did Jesus claim to have? Yes, the authority to forgive sins, which is hugely important, right? Hugely important. And then Matthew 28:18, he steps it up a notch and says he has what authority? All authority in heaven and on earth, leaving nothing out of that inclusion, right? Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and take a break and get some snacks. If you guys haven't logged your minutes, do that now. And we'll be back in 5 minutes. For now, let's just run through the end of this chapter really quick. On page 13, Numbers 14 and 15, what is the gist of those questions?
Like what we wrote up?
Yeah, if you could compile them all into one answer, what would it be?
Jesus is
Jesus is God. They are one and the same, right? And that's important. We see that he made these claims too. We need to see that so that when people ask, because you guys will run into people who say, well, Jesus never actually claimed to be God. Or, I believe Jesus is a good teacher, but he wasn't God. And we'll talk about that here in just a second with the C.S. Lewis quote and unpack that a little bit. And then Numbers 16 and 17, what answer could you pull out of that based on what people said?
Son of God.
Son of God. Right. Even, it's cool here on Hebrews 1:8, God professes Jesus to be God. So if you want the ultimate authority on the subject, God calls Jesus God. And then John 14:6. Does anybody have that memorized?
I know the truth and life.
No one comes to the Father except through me.
Good. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And hopefully, through getting some of these references, these biblical references down, you can see why that verse makes even more sense. That no one comes to the Father except through Jesus, because Jesus is the Father. He is one with the Father. He says, I and the Father are one. So it's like trying to go through somebody else to get to the Father is like trying to talk to somebody else besides me and then say that you talked to me. Right? It just doesn't make sense. But it does make sense that talking to Jesus is talking to God. He says in John 14:7 there, if you have seen me, you have seen the Father. There's that equalness there. So now unpacking this C.S. Lewis quote, let me read it real quick and then see if you guys, what understandings you had about it. C.S. Lewis, who was a professor at Cambridge University and once an agnostic, wrote, I'm trying here to prevent anyone saying the really foolish thing that people often say about him. I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. That is the one thing we must not say. A man who was merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on the level of a man who says he is a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman, or something worse. So what is C.S. Lewis essentially saying here? You can see that these claims show Jesus made that claim. And therefore, if he was crazy, he might have said, I'm God. Just like if I say I'm God right now, I'm probably crazy. Right? Or I'm lying. So he either believed he himself was God, but it wasn't true, which would make him crazy, or he didn't believe he himself was God, and he told people he was, which makes him a liar, a deceitful criminal, an antagonist, or he really did believe he was God, and he was God. Liar, lunatic, or Lord. A very, very simple apologetic that you don't have to be well studied to present the deity of Christ to people. Now, for next week, we're going to have you do chapters 2 and 3. Okay? They are about half the length of chapter 1 each. So it'll be about the same. I know this chapter was longer than any of the other ones. You guys were like, no! You can get it done. It won't be too hard. Okay. Now we're going to go over the final 5 core values of paradigm. And actually, Morgan, do you think you could pull those up? Are things working? If they're off, that's okay.
I can get it back up and working. It'll be hard to see.
It'll be yellow.
It'll be really yellow.
Okay, that's fine.
I can get it up there.
That would be great. Because what we're going to have you do... Okay, break into groups. Well, I'm going to number you off and break you up into groups that way. We're going to break you up into groups, and one group is going to go over one core value each and read the verses that I assign to you and talk about them. I want you to discuss why paradigm follows this core value that's listed, and that'll take about probably 5 to 10 minutes, and then we're going to go through each one and just hear what you have to say. Okay?